The wind howled through the narrow mountain pass, carrying with it the scent of salt from the distant sea. You were nearly at the summit, the rocky path treacherous beneath your feet, but the ancient ruins were in sight, a crumbled temple nestled among jagged peaks. It was said that treasures long forgotten were hidden within, guarded by creatures no mortal dared to face. Suddenly, a piercing screech echoed from above, freezing you in place. Your gaze snapped upward. Silhouetted against the twilight sky, a monstrous shape swooped low, wings wide, talons gleaming like blades in the fading light. As it descended, you could make out the grotesque form of some creature, the twisted body of a bird with matted feathers and powerful wings, but its face was that of a snarling, spiteful woman. The creature hovered just above you, its talons gripping the edge of a boulder, its eyes locked onto yours, filled with malice and hunger.
Another foolish wanderer,
It hissed, voice crackling like dry leaves.
Your bones will join the others.
Before you could react, it spread its wings and let out a bone-chilling cry. In an instant, it lunged, claws slashing through the air. You barely dodged, the talons grazing your armor with a metallic screech. Heart pounding, you drew your weapon, watching the creature circle above, waiting for its next strike. Suddenly, another creature's scream cut through the air, and from the shadows of the cliffs, two more beasts emerged, their wings beating the air as they descended upon you. Each one was as grotesque as the first, their shrill voices filled with a strange, dark joy. Your mind races as you try to think of a way out. The monsters circle closer, their shrieks reverberating off the stone walls. In that moment, it became clear. This was not just a test of your skill, but a fight for survival against the creatures of myth, creatures whose hunger would not be sated easily. You have just encountered a harpy. Just a heads up and reminder, I don't speak or read Greek or ancient Greek. I also don't speak Latin. With that in mind, let's continue. Harpies come to us from Greek mythology. They're also always winged women or bird-women hybrids. That's the bare minimum and the most consistent details regarding these creatures. After those two simple facts, the range as far as description is concerned is a relatively broad one. The word harpy comes from the Greek word harpia. The meaning behind this is believed to be something akin to snatcher, which makes sense because that's one of the harpies' primary duties and favorite pastimes. Snatching things up and flying away with them, never to be seen again. These bird women were known as the hounds of Zeus, and it's the prevalent belief that harpies are the personification of storm winds. So, when the bad weather came, the harpies were sent out to do Zeus's bidding. If a person, ship, or really anything went missing, it was because a harpy stole it. We know harpies come from Greek mythology, but what is their origin in the Greek mythos? It's commonly accepted that harpies are the offspring of a minor sea god named Thomas and a water nymph named Electra. These two minor deities are also responsible for fathering Iris, who's believed to be the personification of the rainbow and works as a messenger of the gods. So, the entire family is basically the personification of everything that happens after storms or rainfall. I know I've said bird woman and hybrids, but what did harpies actually look like? Well, it depends who you ask. If we go back to some of the earliest accounts that mentioned harpies, they were pretty attractive. Names like Homer and Hesiod may ring some bells for you, but if they don't, let's talk about them quickly so we can establish why their opinions matter. Homer is the author of two of the most influential pieces of literature in history, especially in regards to Greek literature. He wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, as well as other things. The Iliad is centered around the Trojan War and the infighting between King Agamemnon and Achilles, as well as the conquering of Troy. The Odyssey, which is personally one of my favorite stories, and the reason why I ever became interested in mythology, tells the story of King Odysseus and his cursed 10-year voyage to return home after the fall of Troy. It's in the Iliad where we learn about one of the earliest bits of information about harpies. Homer credits a harpy named Podarge as the mother of the 2 horses that are owned by Achilles. Hesiod, who was also an ancient Greek poet and is believed to have existed around the same time as Homer, one of his earliest works is named Theogony, where he writes about the origins of the world and the gods. He's essentially credited as being one of the first persons to take all of the variety in Greek mythology and basically standardize it. Hesiod's version of Greek mythology is pretty much the commonly accepted version. Theogony is the earliest known source for the myths of Pandora and her box of all the bad things, as well as Prometheus, the god that was punished for giving us fire. He's the one who gets his liver eaten by an eagle just to have it grow back and happen all over again the next day. In this book, Theogony, Hesiod gives us the first physical description of a harpy. Quote, "The harpies of the lovely hair, Ocypete and Aello, and these 2, in their speed of their wings, keep pace with the blowing winds or birds in flight, as they soar and swoop high aloft." End quote. So from this we can gather that they're fair-locked women that can fly like the wind. At this point in time, which is anywhere from 730 to 700 BC, harpies are attractive women with bird-like features. Think wings, talons, and bird feet on an attractive woman's body that also has amazing flowing hair like White Goodman from Globogym. We can consider this the Hesiodic Greek depiction of a harpy. As we move into a post-Hesiodic era, the description and purpose of a harpy begins to change. We're still Greek, but just a bit more modern with the story of Jason and the Argonauts, written by Apollonius of Rhodes. Before you come after me saying that the story of Jason and the Argonauts is actually from the age of Homer, around 800 BC, I have 2 things to say. 1, you're absolutely correct in saying that the earliest accounts we know of in regards to the story of Jason and his Argonauts are from the same time frame as Homer and by extension Hesiod. 2, that's why I clarified we'll be using Apollonius's version of the story because it's written in 3 BC and it's widely recognized as the most popular and complete version of the tale. In this version of Jason's story, at some point, the Argonauts meet a man named Phineus, who was the king of Thrace at the time. In this meeting with the king, we learn a bit more about harpies. King Phineus managed to royally piss off the gods, and because of that, he was struck blind and surrounded by a buffet of food that he could never eat. Why couldn't he eat it, you may be asking yourself? Well, because of the harpies. They'd steal his food, or if they didn't feel like eating his food themselves, they'd just take a dump on it and render the food completely inedible. Some sources I've read try to censor it and say that the harpies put out some unknown foul substance which would make the food impossible to eat, but at this point in time, the harpies are becoming more bird-like. It makes sense that in a bird-like fashion, they just poop on the food. To illustrate the point a bit better, let's look at the Argonautica by Apollonius Rhodius. This particular version is a free version you can find online at Project Gutenberg. The release date was July 21st, 2008, and has been updated as recently as January 9th, 2020. It's produced by Douglas B. Killings and David Widger. Link will be provided in the description below. Quote, "But on a sudden swooping through the clouds, the harpies with their crooked beaks incessantly snatched the food away from his mouth and hands. And at times not a morsel of food was left, at others but a little, in order that he might live and be tormented. And they poured forth over all a loathsome stench, and no one dared not merely to carry the food to his mouth, but even to stand at a distance. So foully reeked the remnants of the meal." End quote. Couple of things to note here. It doesn't explicitly say the harpies relieve themselves on King Phineus's food, but I think my theory still makes the most sense. Phineus even says himself that sometimes the harpies do leave him scraps of food to keep him alive and suffering, but they smell so bad and are covered with this foul substance that it basically makes him feel less human to eat it. It would make sense that the gods are essentially punishing King Phineus into a lifetime of eating crap. Next is that the harpies now have crooked beaks. That's new. So we're moving more and more into an animal-based description of a harpy. They're also now beginning to be used more explicitly as tormentors and punishers. Now let's move away from the Greek side of things and talk about the Roman perspective. One of ancient Rome's greatest poets, Virgil, writes about the Harpies in his epic poem, the Aeneid. For a bit of backstory, the Aeneid is an epic poem that's 12 books long and tells the story about the foundation of Rome from the ashes of Troy. The hero of this poem is a man named Aeneas, and in Roman mythology, he is credited as being the ancestor of the Roman people. The Aeneid is believed to be written around 30 to 19 BC, so a decade or two before Apollonius's version of the Argonautica. This is what Virgil has to say about Aeneas's encounter with the Harpies. Quote, "Where dreadful Celaeno and her coven of Harpies dwell, now the house of Phineus is barred, and in fear they have left their pristine banquets. No viler monstrosity than they, no pest more atrocious did ever the wrath of God conjure up out of hell's swamp. Bird-bodied, girl-faced things they are, abominable their droppings, their hands are talons, their faces haggard with hunger, insatiable. When we had made our landfall and entered port, we observed abundant herds of cattle, dotted over the vale, and goat flocks browsing there without any goat herd by them. We slaughtered some, we invited Jove and the other gods to take their share of the spoil, then by the winding shore seated on makeshift benches, we are most richly feasting. But the next moment, we hear a hoarse vibration of wing beats. The Harpies are on us, horribly sweeping down from the mountains. They tear the banquet to pieces, filthying all with their bestial touch. Hideous the sounds, nauseous the stench about us." End quote. Again, we get more monstrous and disgusting. This story is written before Apollonius's Argonautica, but we can see that it clearly references Jason and the Argonauts. So it's safe to say that in this time frame, the general view of Harpies has pivoted to one of a monstrous punisher, and it influences all the writings at this time. Let's fast forward a bit around the 1st century AD, and another Roman author by the name of Gaius Julius Hyginus writes Fabulae, a collection of about 300 Greek myths, and in this we get his version of a harpy. Hyginus describes harpies as, quote, "They are said to have been feathered with cocks' heads, wings, and human arms, with great claws, breasts, bellies, and female parts human." End quote. At this point, it's safe to say that harpies have a bad rap. They looked okay and had a bit of an ambiguous purpose as being the entities responsible for whisking things and people away during storms, or being the mischief maker behind why you lose things. Those days are gone. They're grotesque, ugly, stinking creatures that you don't want to have the misfortune of meeting, because if you do, it's almost guaranteed that you're being punished by the gods. To really hammer home that point, let's look at a relatively more recent story, Dante's Inferno. Specifically Canto 13, where Dante enters the second ring of the 7th circle of hell. Throughout the entire story, Dante is guided by Virgil, the Roman poet we just learned about a little while ago. It's in Canto 13 where Dante, guided by Virgil, finds themselves walking to and through the sad, scary, and creepy forest. Virgil tells Dante to break a twig off of a branch, and he's freaked out to hear the scream of pain. These trees are the bodies of those who've chosen to end their own lives, so anything that happens to the tree is painful to the person. This forest is completely infested with harpies, and these harpies spend all their time eating the leaves off the trees, subjecting people and by proxy their souls to eternal pain. Dante writes, quote, "Here the repellent harpies make their nests, who drove the Trojans from the Stropades with dire announcements of the coming woe. They have broad wings, a human neck and face, clawed feet and swollen, feathered bellies. They call their lamentations in the eerie trees." End quote. Now, the harpies are almost completely bird-like with the exception of their neck and face, and once again they're used as tormentors and torturers. To go back to the basic question that started all this, what do harpies look like and what do they do? Well, they can either be attractive winged women with a few bird-like features that steal things from you or take you away should you find yourself in a particularly rough storm, or they can be horrifying bird-like monstrosities with the face, neck, breasts, and genitals of a woman. A monster that not only looks horrible, but smells worse and enjoys crapping on everything and torturing you for as long as they're allowed to do it. According to the myths, they're believed to inhabit the Stropades, which are a couple of small Greek islands in the Mediterranean Sea. Some interesting things to note in modern times, and that includes today, representations of harpies show them in large groups, almost like some sort of pest animal. This may have been inspired by Dante's description of them infesting the forest they live in, but the Greek and even the early Roman myths only have like 3 or 4. They're also written as Harpies with a capital H when talking about them. The Harpies, capital H, it's a classification similar to the Furies, and since there's only 3 recognized Furies, I'm willing to bet that there's only 3 Harpies as well. Plus, humans just have a thing for the number 3, so it's a pretty safe assumption. The harpy eagle, which is one of the largest species of eagle in the world, takes their name from these Greek creatures. The insult of calling a woman a harpy, which means you're calling her cruel, nasty, or unpleasant, also comes from these myths. Ginny Weasley from the Harry Potter franchise plays for the Holy Head Harpies when she's an adult, and just to double dip here and do some harpyception, Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, is also based off of the harpy eagle. I said double dip, but I think I'm actually going to triple dip with Harry Potter. There's a section of Diagon Alley that is called the Harpy Bazaar that also has a statue of a harpy in it. The Philadelphia-based Warlocks Motorcycle Club distinguishes themselves as the Harpy Warlocks and uses a trademarked rendition of a harpy as the center of their patch, which they show proudly on their backs. I don't know biker culture too well, but if I gave any wrong info about that, I apologize in advance and I don't want any trouble. If you happen to find yourself sailing in the Mediterranean Sea past a couple of small islands, and the weather gets bad or it begins to stink a little, don't grab any food because you may attract the attention of a harpy. That concludes this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you enjoyed it, then like, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends. This is Myths, History, and D&D, and I hope you tune in next time.